You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On April 15, 1997, a teenage boy was playing hooky from school to go fishing. He knew exactly where to go, Coteco Creek. This was a small running creek that sometimes flooded when swollen with rainwaters or runoff, but at this time of year, it was at a normal level. This all took place in Union Grove, Alabama, a rural area of Marshall County. The creek access the teen went to was off Eagle Rock Drive, 3 miles west of the small town of Arab, and about half a mile from the Marshall-Morgan County line. At around 11 a.m., the teenager saw something up ahead on the creek bank. It wasn't a fish. He must have had the shock of his life to find the body of a man lying halfway in the creek bed. The man was wearing clothes, but some things were notably missing: his head, his hands, and his feet. The boy ran home and told his parents. I couldn't help wondering whether he got in trouble for playing hooky, but I would imagine not. What he saw that day no doubt impacted him for the rest of his life, and not in a good way. Deputies from the Marshall County Sheriff's Office arrived, summoned to the location by the teenager's parents' phone call. And there, in the woods on the edge of the creek, just as the boy had reported, was the mutilated body of a white male. His ankles were still tied together by a piece of rope and wire ties. Additional pieces of matching rope lay on the ground nearby. Diligent searches of the area didn't turn up the man's missing extremities, but a bunch of air fresheners were found by the body. These led in part to an investigative theory of the case. An autopsy on the mutilated man revealed the following. He was a white male between the ages of 19 and 30. He was about 5 foot 9 inches tall and 155 pounds. Based on his body hair, he had reddish blonde hair on his missing head as well. The young man's head and hands had been removed by a toothed blade, such as a saw. His feet, it was reported, had been nibbled at, detached, and removed by animal predation, but I believe this is inaccurate, and they were removed as well. But that wasn't all. Some other body parts were missing, internal ones. The pathologist found an open wound on the man's chest, and his heart and spleen had been removed with near surgical precision. It's the stuff of nightmares. The pathologist ruled the man's death a homicide by sharp force trauma. It was not clear whether that meant he'd been stabbed or shot or what. Marshall County Sheriff's Office Chief Deputy Willie Orr told McClatchy News in an email, quote, "Based on the location of the incision, we do believe that this was done to destroy forensic evidence," end quote. They called it a forensic countermeasure. What? Marshall County Sheriff's Office Chief Investigator Keith Wilson worked this case for his entire tenure at the Sheriff's Office, being assigned the case in 2000 when he joined the agency. He recently retired. He told WHNT, quote, "Someone went to great lengths to hide the identity of our victim and the cause of his death." The investigator's theory was that the extremities were removed to prevent identification via fingerprints and dentals, and the internal organs were removed because they bore evidence of trauma that could provide investigative leads. For example, evidence of the type of knife blade used or bullets that were buried in those organs. It seems investigator Keith Wilson leaned toward gunshots. He told Sand Mountain News in 2021 that the John Doe's killer had a good understanding of anatomy. The, quote, surgical-type wounds in the victim's chest most likely were intended to obscure bullet holes and removed the ballistic evidence from the corpse. So the investigators didn't have much to go on. They took a look at what they had. According to what's been released, the John Doe was moderately decomposed. But investigator Wilson did not think that he had been lying on that creek bank the whole time he'd been dead. Based on the amputations and the surgery performed on his body, he was certainly killed and mutilated elsewhere. Wilson told the Gadsden Times, quote, "He decomposed somewhere else. The body was only there a matter of days or less. The body had been stored somewhere else before it was disposed of in that creek," end quote. The air fresheners were the dead giveaway here. They were either used by someone to obscure the smell of decomp indoors somewhere where John Doe was being stored, or they were used to keep the smell from pervading a vehicle while the decomposing body was transported. We need to add a new item to our list of suspicious purchases like rope, zip ties, and rubber gloves, a multi-pack of Glade. So John Doe was killed somewhere else. Parts of him were removed and disposed of, and the intact torso, leg, arm portion of him sat somewhere until someone could no longer abide the smell or was afraid of it being noticed. And that's when this person decided to deposit John Doe in the woods on the side of Coteco Creek, perhaps hoping that the water would rise and rush his remains away forever. Investigator Wilson told the Sand Mountain Reporter, quote, "Somebody local may have placed the body there. It's not just a place you find, it's a remote area." He told the Gadsden Times, quote, "I don't think somebody was just wandering through the area and would have found that spot. It was down a dirt road that wasn't used much. There were no houses in the area where the body was placed, and whoever left him there knew that he would not be seen dropping off his incriminating cargo. But maybe he was. More on that in a moment." Because there was no way to identify the John Doe, no prints, no face, no shoe size, no wallet in his jeans pocket, the investigators looked to his clothing. These were a faded glory short-sleeve pullover shirt with blue, green, and gray vertical stripes, and 3230 Levi Strauss 501 jeans. You could not get more generic clothing if you tried, so that led nowhere. But interestingly, the John Doe was wearing a shirt despite his chest having been opened up to remove some organs. Investigator Wilson told the Gadsden Times, quote, "There were indications that he was redressed." Unfortunately, I couldn't get investigators at the Marshall County Sheriff's Office to answer my questions about this case, one of which was about the body being redressed. Marshall County investigators began sifting through missing persons reports from the area and the wider region, hoping that they would come across one in which a young white male with John Doe's physical characteristics was reported. But they didn't find one. Appeals to the public for information yielded some tips that led to dead ends. Investigators concluded that John Doe was likely not from the area and had been dumped there by someone who was. Police turned to the only hope they had at the time, a possible witness sighting of someone involved in the case. 3 days before John Doe was found by the young angler, on April 12th, a witness saw a man in the area. After John Doe's discovery was publicized, this witness came forward to relate what he'd seen. The man the witness saw stood out because he hadn't been seen around here before, and he was, quote, acting nervous. Police believed that this man might have been there because he was dumping John Doe's body. They actually arranged for the witness to undergo hypnosis to recall as many details as possible about the suspicious man. A sketch was released of the man the witness saw, and it is very specific. A description of his vehicle was also released. The man in the sketch was a white male, 6'1", 210 pounds, with a long face, a very high forehead, black collar-length hair, a larger nose which had possibly been broken or was crooked, a, quote, Fu Manchu mustache, and thick, prominent eyebrows. He was wearing a tan shirt, jeans, black rubber boots, and black driving gloves. Yep, that's going to attract attention. The man was driving a 1992 to 1994 brandywine red Chevy Silverado truck with tinted windows, chrome bed rails, a tailgate protector, bug guard, Texas tips on the exhaust, black wall tires, and factory aluminum wheels. The license plate was a Georgia tag with 2 letters and 3 numbers. The second letter was a B. There was an emblem and possibly a flag on the left side of the plate. Despite the amazing specificity of this information and the letter in the truck's license plate, the police were unable to locate the man in the truck. As a later Marshall County Sheriff's Office press release about the efforts to identify John Doe states, quote, investigators from the Marshall County Sheriff's Office and the State Bureau of Investigation worked tirelessly to identify the individual and followed up on numerous leads, but they were still unsuccessful in making a positive identification, end quote. 2 years after John Doe was found, in 1999, then-Governor Don Siegelman announced a $5,000 reward being offered for information leading to the identification of John Doe. Police followed up over the years on tips that came in, some of which were probably motivated by the reward money. They tracked down people named in these tips and questioned them, but were never able to connect anyone to the crime, and no one gave them any identifying information for John Doe. Rumors flew among the community in the Ruth area, and some of them persisted for years. I was able to find posts online by locals professing to know that John Doe was murdered by drug dealers with names like Bulldog, and that his head, hands, and organs were all dumped in different places by multiple participants in the murder. Police, of course, ran down all rumors like this, even interviewing some people they considered suspects, and got nowhere. Over the years, investigators did what they could do to advance John Doe's case. The details of his murder were entered into the FBI's VICAP database, and the FBI did some investigating as well, but no credible leads arose. John Doe was given a NamUs page, UP888, and was listed on the Doe Network as well.
If you want to feel more connected to humanity and a little less alone, listen to Beautiful Anonymous. Each week, I take a phone call from one random anonymous human being. There's over 400 episodes in our back catalog. You get to feel connected to all these different people all over the world. Recent episodes include one where a lady survived a murder attempt by her own son. But then the week before that, we just talked about Star Trek. It can be anything. It's unpredictable. It's raw. It's real. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
In September 2019, the Marshall County authorities released some more information. They held a press conference to inform the media of the status of the case and attempt to gather helpful tips. Investigator Keith Wilson had now been working the John Doe case for 19 years. He told the media, quote, "Every investigator since 1997 that has come through the sheriff's office has in some way touched this case, interviewed somebody, or followed up on leads. I have done extensive work on it. I would love to solve this case before I retire." Wilson said that the remains in the possession of the state forensic lab had been re-examined several times over the years. He told the media that he had gathered both nuclear and mitochondrial DNA from John Doe and submitted it to CODIS's unidentified human remains database, with no hits. He had sent the rope binding John Doe's ankles and all his clothing to forensic labs to be analyzed for touch DNA that could lead to the killer, all to no avail. Quote, "The main focus right now is to look for a person that may be possibly missing that has never been reported. If anybody knows anything like that, if they would call us, that would be great," Wilson said. "It's a matter of identifying that person, and I think that's been the holdup of the case all along." Under questioning from the media, Wilson said that the agency was researching whether they could use a private lab to analyze the DNA from John Doe. In particular, they were interested in technology that would permit the creation of a computer-generated image of John Doe's face. Since they didn't have his head, that was deemed an essential starting point. They were assessing the amount of funds that would be required to do phenotyping and genealogy, about $12,000. "We hope to allow a family somewhere some closure to their missing loved one," Marshall County Sheriff Phil Sims said. Well, they did. Chief Investigator Keith Wilson proposed to Sheriff Sims that they hire Parabon Nanolabs to help identify John Doe. This from the Sand Mountain Reporter, quote, "This is the only cold case we have where we do not have an identification on the victim," said Wilson. "When they brought me this option, I said, absolutely," Sheriff Sims said. "All leads and interviews we have done up to this point have gone nowhere. We don't know who is telling the truth. If we can identify the victim, we can solve this case." They gathered the funds required to pay for the DNA testing and analysis. DNA was extracted from one of John Doe's femurs by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, and in December 2019, 3.5 nanograms of DNA was sent to Parabon. Whole genome sequencing produced 97.9% of the SNPs needed for investigative genetic genealogy after imputation. In May 2021, the Marshall County Sheriff's Office released a phenotype image of John Doe, prepared using Parabon's snapshot technology. It was the first time John Doe had ever been given facial features, which were dictated by his DNA. The computer-generated image showed a light-skinned white male with a prominent chin, sandy hair, blue or green eyes, and some freckles. His ancestry was largely Northern European. The sheriff's office, hoping against hope that someone's recognition would be triggered by the image of John Doe, implored the public for help. Behind the scenes, Parabon was conducting a genealogy analysis of the case. It took a long time as the sequencing and imputation were complex and the genealogy was not clear-cut. Parabon delivered the phenotype to the MCSO on November 17, 2020, but the genealogy was not completed until August 2022. It took this much time because when John Doe's SNP profile was initially uploaded to GEDmatch, the top match was only 54 centimorgans. a very distant cousin. The top 7 matches ranged from 54 centimorgans on the high end to 33 centimorgans on the low end. Parabon's initial report recommended a few courses of action. One would be to pay to upload to family tree DNA to access any additional matches that might be in the database there. Another might be to just wait. Parabon would continually monitor uploads to both databases to see if any additional matches came in. The agency approved the upload to family tree DNA, and this was done in March 2021. With additional uploads to GEDmatch and some matches located in the family tree DNA database, the genealogist's top 10 matches then ranged from 63 at the high end to 41 at the low end. However, things were complicated by pedigree collapse. I've addressed this phenomenon in previous episodes. It's often seen in rural, isolated communities with significant intermarriage. Members of this population group share more DNA in common than is typical, and the matches are often related in more than one way. You'll hear what I mean in a moment. Despite the confusing interrelatedness of many of the matches in John Doe's lineage, the genealogist Stephanie Wyatt focused on a recurring surname among the matches, Burks. She eventually connected 3 of the matches back to common ancestor William Burks, born in 1743. Parabon continued to monitor weekly uploads and was able to progress the analysis when someone sharing 195 centimorgans of DNA with the subject, the equivalent of a second cousin once removed, entered his or her DNA into the family tree DNA database. This was a significantly closer relationship than had previously been located, but hopes were temporarily dashed when the genealogist saw that the uploader had an untraceable email address. A search indicated that more than a dozen people in the United States had the same name that was attached to this email address, and the genealogist was not about to research every one of their trees. So they focused on one who lived in geographic proximity to some of the other people in the Burks family tree that the genealogist could see. This eventually led Ms. Wyatt to identify the 195 centimorgan cousin, whose mother's maiden name was Kimzey. Once she had the name of the likely second cousin once removed, Ms. Wyatt set to work constructing a detailed tree for this new top match, going back 4 generations and then performing descendancy research to connect in any other matches she knew were related to John Doe. Since she knew he had the surname Burks in his heritage, she was careful to focus on that name if and when it came up. While she was constructing the family tree of this 195 centimorgan second cousin once removed of John Doe, she found a name in the tree that stood out because it was somewhat unusual and she'd seen it before. An ancestor of the top match was a David Kimzey, born in 1755. So based on the suspected relationship between the top match and John Doe, Ms. Wyatt went all the way back to match number 1's great-grandparents, who were Lewis Kimzey, born 1896, and Edna Jones, born 1897. And she researched the descendants of that couple. She found one son, Edward Kimzey, born 1916, who married a Gladys Estelle Sweet, born 1921. Gladys's mother, Cora's maiden name was Burks. This was the aha moment for the genealogist, who had been on the lookout for that name. In looking at Cora's parents, she learned that they were William Benton Burks, born 1866, and Laura Ellen Burks, born 1872. This is a quote from a journal article Ms. Wyatt co-wrote about the case for the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Quote, "The couple were double second cousins twice removed to each other through their shared ancestor David Burks, the son of William Burks, born 1743, the common ancestor of genetic network number 1, end quote. Double second cousins share not one, but 2 pairs of great-grandparents. Second cousins typically share just one. Here was the tangible impact of the pedigree collapse I mentioned earlier. So the triangulation between the Kimzey branch and the Burks branch happened with the marriage of Edward and Gladys Kimzey, which took place in 1938. So Ms. Wyatt knew that John Doe was almost certainly a descendant from this union. Edward and Gladys had 2 sons, both of whom were still alive, in the year that the Marshall County, Alabama John Doe was discovered, 1997. So Ms. Wyatt turned to those sons' sons, i.e. the grandsons of Gladys and Edward. And that's when she figured it out. One grandson was MIA, Jeffrey Kimzey, born on February 7, 1977, in Santa Barbara, California, to parents Monty Kimzey and Bonnie Kimzey. He lived in San Marcos, California, and would have been 20 years old when Marshall County, John Doe, was discovered. Ms. Wyatt's August 2022 report to the Marshall County Sheriff's Office pointed the investigators toward a person in Madison, Tennessee, whom she suspected was a close relative of John Doe, theorized to be Jeffrey Kimzey. Madison is in driving distance of Marshall County, and on September 2nd, Marshall County investigator Willie Orr contacted this relative, and the relative put him in touch with Jeffrey's parents, who are alive and living in California. Investigator Orr made contact with a Detective Adam Allegoria at the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. Detective Allegoria went to the address listed for the suspected parents of Jeffrey Kimzey and obtained DNA samples. Kinship testing of both parents by the State Forensic Lab proved that their son Jeffrey Kimzey was the Marshall County John Doe. So what do we know about Jeffrey? Not very much. His family has been in regular contact with the Marshall County investigators but has not spoken publicly. Although he left his family at some point, they never filed a missing persons report for him. They believed he was a voluntary missing and that he was out there living his life. The sheriff described their reaction at learning of his demise 26 years earlier as distraught. Jeffrey's grandmother's 2011 obituary listed him as a living relative, but unlike all the other relatives, there was no location listed for Jeffrey, illustrating that his family believed he was alive, whereabouts unknown. When his body was found 2,000 miles from home in Union Grove in 1997, he had recently turned 20 years old. We know that Jeffrey resembled the phenotype prepared by Parabon. San Marcos High School yearbook photos from 1993, 1994, and 1995 show that he had a prominent chin and blue eyes. In a May 2023 press conference, Sheriff Sims described the case and difficulties associated with identifying Jeffrey because of the removed body parts and deliberate obscuring of the forensic evidence. Now we have an identity that we can backtrack, he said. That's huge, but at the same time, it just makes us work harder. There have been many investigators who have worked on this case over the course of many years, and some of them are with us today. I know they would like to see this case solved, but having a positive identification will help us get closer to solving this case. I want to thank all the investigators, the people at Parabon who worked tirelessly on this case, the Alabama Department of Forensic Science, Marshall County Coroner's Office, Marshall County District Attorney's Office, and everyone involved. The sheriff went on to acknowledge that they did not know how Jeffrey Kimzey got to Alabama, nor did they have details on his work history, his personal life, his travel. He said, "We are asking the public who might know Jeffrey Kimzey, who he hung out with, his locations, and so on. If anyone has any information about this case from that time period, please call the sheriff's office." Then Sheriff Sims ended with an announcement, quote, "Today we want to announce that we do have persons of interest in this case and are actively pursuing those leads. Also, we will be working with Parabon on DNA that we have recently become aware of related to items found at the scene." End quote. Reading between the lines, it sounds like they used advanced DNA extraction technology, perhaps the AbJack, to obtain DNA off Kimzey's clothing, the ropes, the air fresheners, or something else. They intend to use it in hopes of finding a suspect's matching DNA. They sound hopeful that Kimzey's case will be solved. Marshall County District Attorney Jennifer Bray also spoke at the press conference. She said, "We hope that the public comes forward with more information. We are eager to hold accountable the person that's responsible for the homicide of this person." Investigators are now asking anyone who may have known Jeffrey Kimzey to contact the sheriff's office at 256-582-2034. After the Jeffrey Kimzey episode aired, I was able to make contact with Marshall County Sheriff's Office Chief Deputy Willie Orr, and he clarified a few things for me. One important one involves the removal of Jeffrey's feet. I said in the episode that although there were reports of animal predation being responsible, I felt that Jeffrey's feet had been deliberately removed just like his head and hands. Chief Deputy Orr was able to confirm that for me. Jeffrey's feet were removed, perhaps to obscure shoe size or a tattoo. Another question I got an answer to was about John Doe being redressed. Chief Deputy Orr told me that indeed, John Doe's shirt was on backwards. Of course, it was unlikely that he dressed himself that way. It seems to me likely that his shirt was removed in connection with the internal organ removal and hastily put back on after that procedure was concluded. The perpetrator didn't notice or didn't care that the shirt was on backwards. I also asked about whether the man seen by the witness near the crime scene, the one with the high forehead and the very specific truck, was indeed believed to be connected to the crime. I was told that he is a person of interest. Interestingly, one question I asked was whether Jeffrey Kimzey, then a John Doe, was ever buried. As you know, many of the Does I have covered have been buried in unmarked paupers' graves. I was told that for the duration of his time as a John Doe, Jeffrey Kimzey was in the custody of the Alabama Department of Forensics. Since his identification, the Marshall County Coroner's Office worked with the Kimzey family to return his remains to them. Speaking of the Kimzey family, when the sheriff's office personnel spoke with them, they had no information whatsoever on what Jeffrey could have been doing in Alabama. As for the current status of the homicide investigation, Chief Deputy Orr confirmed for me that they have persons of interest and are currently working to connect potential DNA found at the crime scene to those persons. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.